a United States delegation met with Kremlin negotiators in Saudi Arabia on Monday, where the Trump administration is pushing for progress towards a ceasefire in separate talks with Russia and Ukraine, just as Russian strikes injured scores of people in Ukraine, including children. A Russian missile strike on the northeastern Ukrainian city of Sumy on Monday wounded 65 people. This included 14 children. And this as talks between Russian and US officials concluded late on Monday evening after more than 12 hours, as per Russian media. Well, for further clarity, we have with us Dr. Richard Benkin, joining us live from Chicago at the moment. Dr. Benkin, as we speak, do you agree that a wide gulf in expectations exists between Russia, Ukraine, and their US interlocutors? Are you actually optimistic about any breakthroughs in Saudi Arabia?
First of all, thank you for having me on. Actually, I think what we're seeing is certainly this is more difficult than first anticipated by the president during his campaign. However, we're so much farther along than we ever had been, or we've even been expected to be at this point. What's going to happen? You know, it's impossible to say. However, I think we can be optimistic. I think it's a matter of just finding that right combination that's going to force both Mr. Putin and Mr. Zelensky to sign the document. However, I think we also need to recognize that there are three incredible geopolitical dynamics going on right now. First, one of the most troubling developments over the last several years has been the strengthening of what we can call the axis of authoritarianism, arrayed against freedom and democracy: China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. And here we're seeing the first real cracks in that alliance, and that the implications of that are enormous. You know, Russia, I think, is beginning to see that there are benefits in having good relations with the United States rather than standing against the United States. And look, with the two largest nuclear powers talking, I think everyone in the world can sleep a little more easily. Secondly, we're seeing a reorientation of U.S. foreign policy, whereby the United States is no longer going to pick up the tab for Europe's defense and perhaps orienting itself more towards Asia, and in particular India, rather than Europe. And third, look at the role of Saudi Arabia. Not long ago, Saudi Arabia was considered something of a pariah after the murder of the Washington Post journalist. And in fact, former President Biden was unbridled in his comments to that respect. And here, Saudi Arabia is hosting a conference that might bring an end to the biggest war in Europe since World War II. And finally, not only will that help Saudi Arabia thrive for the rest of this century and beyond, but I think we can see it as a prelude to Saudi Arabia ultimately becoming part of President Trump's Abraham Accords, which is an absolute game changer for the Middle East.
Moscow says a ceasefire will not be possible unless Kyiv actually agrees not to use it to resupply or reorganize its troops. So that maybe is a maybe bold and highlighted. In fact, many are questioning whether this is really a fair deal for Ukraine then, or a deal at all. But Dr. Benkin, we'll of course revert to you for regular updates. Thanks so much for joining us.